FBI's recovered new images from Nancy Guthrie's home cameras. Pictures from her front door, driveway, and backyard, but they're still missing critical footage of the night she went missing. And sources say that's odd.
The last person to see an 84-year-old Nancy alive was her own son-in-law. He drove her home, watched her walk inside, and then she vanished forever. Her blood was on the floor. Her phone was still on the table. The cameras had been torn from the walls. And the man who dropped her off that night was about to become the most talked about person in America. Now his name is trending alongside the words life sentence and goodbye forever. Millions believe it is over. Investigators know it is not. The last drive home. It was January 31st, 2026, Tucson, Arizona, when a family dinner was wrapping up at the home of Annie Guthrie and her husband Tommaso Cioni. It was a perfectly ordinary evening by every visible measure. The food had been eaten, the conversation had wound down, and it was time for the oldest family member at the table to get home. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had lived in Tucson for more than 50 years. She had raised 3 children largely on her own after her husband Charles died in 1988 during a mining exploration trip in Mexico. She was sharp, present, and full of life. She also had limited mobility, needed daily medication, and lived completely alone in a house that she had made into a home over 5 decades. Tommaso Cioni offered to drive her. He loaded her into the car, pulled out of the driveway, and made the short trip to Nancy's house. He arrived around 9:45 in the evening. He did not just pull up to the curb and let her out the way you might with someone young and able-bodied. He stayed. He parked. He watched her make her way to the front door. He waited in the driveway for approximately 2 full minutes to make sure she was safely inside the house before he drove away. That 2-minute wait matters. We will come back to it, because it is one of the details that certain people have pointed to as either the most innocent thing in the world or the most calculated. Depending on which version of Tommaso Cioni you believe, that wait was either a caring son-in-law being responsible or a man making absolutely certain the camera registered that he watched her go inside before he left. Now, here is where things start to get uncomfortable, because everything that followed in this investigation would circle back to that moment in the driveway. Who drove her home? How long did he waited? What he knew about the house? What the cameras were recording? What they were not recording? And what happened in the hours between that quiet 2-minute wait in the driveway and the moment investigators found blood on Nancy's floor the next afternoon? Tommaso Cioni is Savannah Guthrie's brother-in-law. Savannah is one of the most recognizable journalists in America. She has co-anchored NBC's Today Show since 2012. She is warm, polished, and widely liked across the political spectrum. Her estimated net worth sits around $40 million. She is exactly the kind of person whose mother becomes a target if someone with specific knowledge decides to make a financial move against the family. Within days of the disappearance, the internet had already made up its mind about Tommaso. The reality is far more complicated, far more disturbing, and far more layered than any social media verdict could capture. And to understand why Tommaso Cioni became the center of this story, you first need to understand exactly what investigators found when they walked into Nancy's home the following afternoon. Because what was waiting inside that house suggested that whoever took Nancy Guthrie had been planning this for a very long time before January 31st. What was left behind? When family members arrived at Nancy's home on the afternoon of February 1st and called 911, deputies responding to the scene found a situation that told a story immediately. Her phone was inside. Her medication was inside. Her purse and her personal belongings had not been touched. There was no sign of a struggle throughout most of the house. Everything that should have suggested Nancy had simply stepped out for a moment was in place. except for the blood near the front door. Investigators confirmed through DNA testing that the bloodstains found near the entrance of the home belonged to Nancy. A visible trail of blood ran near the entrance. The doorbell camera that should have recorded whatever happened in the early hours of the morning had been physically removed from the wall of the house. Not disconnected, not malfunctioning, physically pulled off and gone. The camera's software logs had kept running even after the hardware was removed, and those logs revealed a precise and horrifying timeline. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the doorbell camera disconnected from the network. At 2:12 a.m., the motion detection software registered the presence of a person at the front of the property, but there was no video attached to that registration because the camera was already gone. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker stopped syncing with her iPhone. Investigators believe that 2:28 a.m. timestamp is the moment Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home. Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the public directly on February 2nd and said, "At this point, investigators believe she was taken from her home against her will, possibly in the middle of the night. She couldn't walk 50 yards by herself." But here is the detail that most initial coverage glossed over entirely, the detail that changes the entire nature of this crime. The neighborhood's internet did not just go down randomly that night. Neighbors later reported to investigators that their own home security camera footage from that specific window of time was missing or marked as unavailable in their systems. A damaged utility box near the property came under active investigation. Sheriff Nanos confirmed it publicly. If you look at that timeline, there was a timeline when things went offline. Someone disabled the neighborhood's internet before they ever touched Nancy's doorbell camera. Someone who knew exactly which utility box to tamper with. Someone who understood the camera infrastructure of that specific street. Someone who had clearly been to that neighborhood before, probably multiple times, and had studied how it worked. This was not a robbery. This was not a random home invasion by someone who happened to drive past an elderly woman's house. This was a planned, coordinated abduction that required advanced knowledge of the victim's home, her neighborhood, her camera systems, her internet provider, and her personal schedule. The FBI's Phoenix field office joined the investigation within 48 hours. Nancy was listed on the FBI's National Missing and Kidnapped Persons page. A reward of $100,000 was announced. The case was officially classified as a kidnapping. And then investigators released something quietly, almost as an afterthought in the initial flood of news coverage that should have been the loudest alarm in the entire story. The man in the ski mask. On February 10th, 9 days after Nancy's disappearance, the FBI released doorbell camera footage to the public. The footage showed a man at Nancy's front door wearing a full ski mask, a pair of dark gloves, and carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, the specific style sold exclusively at Walmart. He was holding a firearm that was improperly holstered, carried in a way that suggested access to a weapon without formal firearms training. At the front door, he reached into the potted plant beside the entrance and used the leaves to obscure the camera lens before tearing the device from the wall. The FBI described the suspect as male, between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall. Average build, with a visible black mustache below the bottom edge of the mask. That description and those images are almost everything investigators have said publicly about the physical appearance of the person who took Nancy Guthrie. Think about what this requires. You would need to know the victim's name and address. You would need to know she lived alone. You would need to know she had limited mobility and could not fight back or run. You would need to know the camera system and how it worked. You would need to know the utility infrastructure of the street. You would need to know her weekly schedule well enough to predict which nights she would be out and which nights she would be home alone. And critically, you would need to know that on the specific evening of January 31st, she was having dinner with family and would be returning home alone at a predictable time, with no one planning to check on her until the following morning. On February 4th, 2026, journalist Ashley Banfield reported on her podcast, Drop Dead Serious, that an unnamed law enforcement source had identified Tommaso Cioni as the primary suspect in the case. She did not name her source. She did not provide documentation. She offered one unnamed claim from inside the investigation and broadcast it to her audience as the defining framework for understanding the case. The public did not treat it as an unverified single-source report. The public treated it as a confirmed fact. And when you look at the information required to plan this abduction, it is not hard to understand why people made that leap. Who knew Nancy's address? The family. Who knew she lived alone? The family. Who knew her medication schedule? The family. Who knew her weekly routine and the fact that she would be at dinner on January 31st and would be dropped off alone that night? The family. And who dropped her off knew exactly what time she arrived home and drove away just before the surveillance window opened? The question investigators could not avoid was whether the person who drove Nancy home that night was the same person who told someone else exactly when to be waiting for her. The firestorm around Tommaso Cioni. Tommaso Cioni is 50 years old. He was born in San Giovanni Valdarno, a small town in Tuscany, Italy. He has lived in the United States since 2006, the year he married Annie Guthrie. He is a science teacher at Basis Oro Valley Charter School in Tucson, where he has taught 6th grade and AP biology for more than 15 years. He plays bass and sings in a local band called Early Black. He writes poetry in Italian. He describes himself in a cultural association profile as someone who writes when it happens, studies lizards, plays the electric bass, and makes homemade pasta. But none of that context made it into the posts that went viral in the days following Ashley Banfield's report. Rumors spread rapidly across social media that Cioni had significant gambling debts and had orchestrated the kidnapping to pressure the Guthrie family for money. Legal experts who reviewed a power of attorney document that reportedly surfaced in Nancy's belongings confirmed it was standard real estate paperwork with no unusual implications whatsoever. But the version that spread online described it as a sinister financial instrument that proved motive. Vietnamese spam networks, the kind that manufacture outrage bait for advertising revenue, began producing fully fabricated stories claiming that police had physically surrounded Cioni's home, that he had been seen being arrested, that neighbors had witnessed officers leading him out in handcuffs. Lead Stories, a dedicated fact-checking organization, tracked those fabricated posts to coordinated spam operations and published a full debunking on February 10th, confirming that every element of those stories had been invented. Investigators searched Annie and Tommaso's home with the family's full and voluntary consent. They impounded the family's blue Honda CR-V for forensic examination. They took Tommaso in for questioning. He cooperated completely throughout the entire process. He did not disappear. He did not attempt to leave the country despite being an Italian citizen with ties abroad. He did not retain attorneys in a way that suggested he had something to hide. The vehicle was eventually returned. No charges were filed against him at any stage. Sheriff Nanos, watching the media coverage turn into something he could no longer control, called Banfield's reporting reckless and stated explicitly that no suspect or person of interest had been officially identified by his department. When asked specifically about Cioni, Nanos said he understood public interest in the son-in-law, but confirmed that nobody had been ruled out because the investigation was still active across every possible direction, not because Cioni was under specific suspicion. Then on February 16, 2026, Nanos issued a formal written statement that was intended to end the conversation permanently. He said, "To be clear, The Guthrie family, to include all siblings and spouses, has been cleared as possible suspects in this case. The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious and are victims in this case. A source with knowledge of the Cioni family situation told People magazine that Tommaso deserved a public apology after being dragged through the mud for no reason. The Guthrie family's legal team reportedly explored whether a defamation claim against Banfield was viable. Multiple attorneys who reviewed the situation assessed that the lawsuit would not succeed under First Amendment protections that broadly cover reporting on matters of public concern, even when that reporting relies on unnamed sources. Media personality Megyn Kelly continued to publicly suggest that Cioni had not been fully cleared and that law enforcement was either missing something or withholding information. She offered no evidence to support that position. She offered her opinion, and her opinion was amplified to millions of viewers who had already made up their minds. There is also one piece of analysis that almost nobody in the coverage of Cioni as a suspect bothered to apply. If the motive for this abduction was financial, specifically a ransom demand targeting the Guthrie family's wealth, Tommaso Cioni gains nothing from that outcome. Annie Guthrie is his wife. A ransom paid out would come from the same family accounts that support their household. His mother-in-law being kidnapped for ransom does not enrich him. It destabilizes the family he married into. The financial logic of casting Cioni as the orchestrator collapses under the most basic examination. Apart from this, the investigation was making critical errors that had nothing to do with Tommaso Cioni, and those errors were about to become a public scandal of their own. How the investigation started falling apart. From the very first hours after Nancy was reported missing, the official response showed cracks. The crime scene was left without a secured perimeter in the early stages of the investigation. 2 reporters allegedly walked onto the property before it was fully locked down. Deputies conducting the initial sweep of the property overlooked a roof-mounted security camera that could have captured additional footage from the night of the abduction. A reconnaissance aircraft that could have begun aerial surveillance of the surrounding area almost immediately sat grounded for 3 hours because Sheriff Nanos had reassigned the only deputy qualified to operate it to street patrol. That reassignment was reportedly the result of a personal dispute within the department that had nothing to do with the Guthrie case. 3 hours of aerial search time lost in the first day of a kidnapping investigation. Then came the DNA controversy that drew the loudest criticism of any single decision made in this case. Evidence recovered from Nancy's property included DNA samples. The mixture was complex, meaning it came from multiple individuals and required sophisticated processing to separate into usable profiles. Investigators entered what was available into CODIS, the FBI's National DNA Database. It returned no matches, meaning the suspect either had no prior criminal record or had never been processed into the system. That left forensic genetic genealogy as the next viable pathway, using consumer ancestry databases to trace the DNA backwards through family trees until a match could be triangulated. This technique identified the Golden State Killer after 44 years. It has solved dozens of cases that had gone completely cold, and it requires the evidence to be handled properly. Sheriff Chris Nanos sent the physical DNA evidence to DNA Labs International, a private forensic company in Deerfield Beach, Florida, rather than to the FBI's own facilities at Quantico, Virginia. Kristen Middleman, co-founder of forensic genealogy firm Othram, went public with her reaction. She said, "This is so devastating. DNA Labs International is a traditional forensic lab that processes evidence to make an STR profile, so I do not understand why it did not go to Quantico, since they can do this better and faster than anyone." An FBI source told Fox News, "I have seen so many cases go to Florida and be consumed. Also, they are not as fast. And in this case, time matters." Nanos defended the choice by arguing that splitting evidence between two labs would create jurisdictional and procedural conflicts. But the result was that the FBI was effectively blocked from directly accessing the most important physical evidence collected from the crime scene. Black gloves recovered approximately 2 miles from the property were initially reported as potentially matching those seen on the masked suspect in the surveillance footage. They were traced back to a local restaurant worker with no connection to the case. 16 pairs of gloves collected from the surrounding area were similarly cleared. A California man named Derek Colella, 42, was charged with federal crimes for sending a fabricated ransom demand to Annie Guthrie, posing as the actual kidnapper, to try to extract money from the grieving family. He had no involvement in the abduction. He was simply an opportunist. The real ransom demands, the ones received by Tucson's CBS affiliate, KOLD-TV, and by TMZ, the ones containing specific details about Nancy's home and her clothing that would only be known to someone who had been inside the house, have never been traced to a confirmed sender. And while the investigation was stumbling over its own decisions on the ground, the director of the FBI was about to make everything significantly worse from a television studio. Kash Patel and the publicity problem. FBI Director Kash Patel made this investigation about himself. That sentence is not an exaggeration. It is a description of what the documented record shows. On February 10, 2026, while investigators were carefully managing which details about the masked suspect remained confidential and which could be safely released to the public, Patel posted surveillance footage directly to his personal X account. Not through official FBI press channels, not through a coordinated joint release with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. Through his personal social media profile under his personal username. According to CNN, investigators already on the ground were taken aback by the posts. At least one image Patel published appeared to show the suspect at the property on a night different from the night of the abduction, meaning it likely captured the earlier surveillance visit that investigators had specifically wanted to keep quiet while they worked to identify whose face might be traceable through other means. That same evening, Patel appeared on Fox News' Hannity program and announced substantial progress and persons of interest in the case. He said the FBI had made substantial progress in words designed to convey authority and momentum. Within hours of that broadcast, the man who had been detained near the Mexican border as a potential person of interest, a delivery driver named Carlos Palazuelos, was released without any charges. He stood outside and told reporters, "I am just a delivery driver in Tucson. I hope they get the suspect because I am not it." Former FBI counterterrorism executive Christopher O'Leary responded publicly. He said Patel's conduct was incredibly inappropriate and that Patel was unfit for the job. He pointed specifically to the vacancy created when Brian Driscoll, the senior official who would normally manage federal coordination on a case of this magnitude, had been fired months earlier without stated cause. Senator Chris Murphy wrote, "The FBI, now run by online influencers, hair tonic salesmen, and talk show hosts, has become a shell of its former self." On February 22nd, while Nancy Guthrie remained missing and her family was in ongoing grief and uncertainty, Kash Patel was photographed at the Winter Olympics in Milan, celebrating with the U.S. men's hockey team, drinking beer and chanting in a crowd. The footage spread rapidly. Even Candace Owens, a commentator who had broadly supported Patel and his tenure, publicly criticized him for racing over there to play hero in the Guthrie case while the investigation stalled. A leaked internal FBI document from December 2025 described the Bureau under Patel as dismal, all messed up, and a rudderless ship. Approximately 3,063 FBI employees left the agency in 2025 alone. The institution tasked with finding Nancy Guthrie was, by its own internal admission, in crisis before this case ever began. With a fractured investigation, compromised evidence handling, and a director more interested in cable news appearances than in results, the family decided they could not wait for the system to work on its own. What we actually know till now: on February 24, 2026, Savannah Guthrie stood before cameras and offered a reward of $1 million for information leading to her mother's safe return. The family also donated $500,000 to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Combined with the FBI's existing reward, the total available to anyone with credible information now stood at more than $1.2 million. On March 2nd, Savannah, Annie, and Tommaso Cioni walked to the memorial outside Nancy's home and laid flowers. Savannah attached a handwritten card. "Though we are surrounded by so much darkness and uncertainty, our love burns bright." Earlier, Savannah had acknowledged in a public statement that her mother may already be gone. Those 4 words from a woman who had held herself together in public for 6 weeks said everything. As of March 14, 2026, day 42, here is what is confirmed. Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home against her will in the early morning hours of February 1st. Her blood was found at the scene. The doorbell camera was physically removed. The neighborhood internet was disrupted. A masked man had been conducting advanced surveillance of the property. The FBI is actively working the case alongside a violent crimes task force. More than 40,000 tips have been received. More than 10,000 hours of footage have been reviewed. The reward stands at $1.2 million. And forensic genetic genealogy analysis of the DNA evidence is currently underway. Sheriff Nanos has said the abduction was targeted. He has said investigators believe they understand the motive. He has said the suspect could strike again. He has said he personally believes Nancy is alive. He said to NBC, "We believe we know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted." And he warned publicly, "Don't think for a minute that because it happened to the Guthrie family, you are safe." Investigators are simultaneously pursuing 6 distinct theories. The first is a burglary that escalated beyond what was originally planned. The second is a targeted ransom kidnapping, exploiting the public knowledge of Savannah Guthrie's wealth and profile. The third is a contracted professional operation, meaning someone paid someone else to take Nancy. The fourth involves cartel or organized crime networks active in the Arizona and southern border region. The fifth centers on an insider, someone with direct knowledge of the property layout, the camera system, the internet infrastructure, and Nancy's personal schedule. The sixth is opportunistic crime, which investigators consider least likely given the extensive evidence of advanced planning. A retired FBI agent raised a potential investigative thread connecting this case to a home invasion in Scottsdale, Arizona, that also occurred on January 31st, in which 2 teenagers from California posing as delivery drivers attempted to gain entry to a property. No confirmed connection between the 2 incidents has been established, but the same night geographic proximity has kept that thread active in the investigation. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffin-Daffer said in early March, "This case is the polar opposite of a cold case. It is a red-hot case with agents up to 100 and analysts and Pima County Sheriff's officers working on all actionable leads." Now here is what this video owes you directly, because you came here with a specific claim in your search results, and you deserve the full documented truth about it. Tommaso Cioni has been officially cleared by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. He was cleared on February 16th with a formal statement that included every member of the immediate family. He cooperated with the investigation completely. He submitted to questioning. He allowed his home to be searched. He allowed his vehicle to be seized and examined. The vehicle was returned. No charges were filed. No evidence connecting him to the abduction has been made public. The claim that he was identified as a prime suspect came from a single unnamed source cited by a podcast journalist. That claim was called reckless by the sheriff running the investigation. The viral stories claiming he had been blockaded in his home by police were traced to Vietnamese spam networks producing fabricated clickbait. The claims about gambling debts were never substantiated. The claims about the power of attorney document were addressed by legal experts who confirmed it was standard paperwork. The claim circulating online that Tommaso Cioni was sentenced to life imprisonment is an outright fabrication. There has been no trial. There has been no conviction. There has been no sentencing. None of that exists anywhere in reality. What does exist is a family in profound pain. A daughter who said goodbye to her mother in a handwritten note on a street corner because she did not know what else to do. A husband who drove his mother-in-law home, watched her walk to her door, waited 2 minutes, and has spent the 42 days since living with the weight of being the last one to see her. And somewhere out there, a man in a ski mask who planned this carefully, executed it precisely, and has not been identified. The DNA is being processed. The tips are being followed. The reward is still waiting to be claimed. The investigation is not over. The truth is not buried. And the answer to what happened to Nancy Guthrie on the night of January 31st is still out there, waiting for one person to say what they know. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 42 days. The reward is $1.2 million, and the man who took her has still not been found. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us, with everything this investigation has gotten wrong, what do you think it is going to take to finally bring her home?